I do want to add one thing to the programs Chris brought up, and that is our Southeastern Plant Symposium. Actually, I want to add two things. And you said people can hear me while the trains are going?
Yeah, that's the train.
All right. Two things. One is our Ralston Blooms Garden Festival and Plant Sale. It is back in person again, the Plant Sale and Festival. Very excited about that after 2 years of it not being in person. And but we've learned from previous years, so we will have an online portion starting on April 8th. April 8th.
Friday the 8th. Members only.
Friday the 8th. Members only for that part. Then we will open up to the public a little bit later than that. You can look on our website and find it, jcra.ncsu.edu. And then there will be in-person members only on Friday, April 30th and April 29th. Dates, I have a hard time with dates. 29th. April 29th, and then Ralston Blooms, the whole big garden festival with lots of activities for kids, families, food trucks, everything is Saturday, April 30th. So it's a whole lot of fun. There will be some plants that are offered both online and in person, but some plants will only be offered one or the other, not necessarily in both. So you want to check that out. The other one, a little bit farther down the road, is the Southeastern Plant Symposium, June 10th and 11th. That's 2 days of nothing but plant nerdery. We have, I think 13, 14 speakers, something like that. 2 full days of some of the best plants people in the world. Liberto Dario from Greece, Peter Zale from Longwood. Just, it's a who's who of plants people. And along with that is the rare plant auction to end all rare plant auctions. This is where people come in, for this program, all kinds of plant people, colleagues from other botanic gardens, nurserymen, real enthusiastic individuals. And we all the folks that we get plants from are trying to outdo each other by bringing the coolest plants for the auction. So, and that will be available online, even if you didn't register for the program. But really hope you'll be there and join us, because it's that chatting with people during breaks is part of the fun. All right, enough about programs. Let's hear some questions.
The online group so far is quiet. I have a couple pre-printed ones someone sent me by email. We do encourage you to come in person and do the questions. But did you want to do the show and tell first, or wait for a little while for that one?
Well, I was going to wait and see if we had questions.
All
so
right.
let's do questions first, and then we can talk about some plants and get people's juices flowing.
So I do have a couple of questions from one of our volunteers. Where am I? There we go. The first question, she has a Nandina, blush pink to be specific, that has lost the pretty round shape that drew it to her at the garden center. 5 years later, it looks more like a conical cylinder with a few odd cowlicks. She was wondering how she could prune that just for shaping, because that one is a very strange growing habit. Any suggestions for pruning?
Well, all Nandinas, they put up lots of stems from the ground. And so to prune an Andina, you can go in and take back the oldest stems all the way to the ground and reveal the younger ones. And you should be able to recover a nice shape by doing that. Typically, you can take back a third of the plant each year, and then you have a whole new plant every 3 years. At my own home, I don't do it nearly that often because I like nice, big, irregular Nandinas, but that's more or less the way you can do it.
I was basically going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I want to make, just because we're on this and it's something that I've been dealing with recently with people, I want to address a myth that is so prevalent in the literature about Nandina. And I'm not going to say that Nandina can't be a problem in some areas. It really does invade some natural areas. Down in Florida, it's a real problem in areas. So I'm not talking about that end. The other end, People will tell you, and you'll see it online, Nandina kills cedar waxwings and possibly other birds. There have been 2 incidences in Georgia, in Decatur, Georgia, and Thomasville, something like that. And the headlines all say, you know, Nandina kills, mass killing of cedar waxwings. So if you look at that original one, the 2009 one in Decatur, if you read the actual articles from that time, what you will see is that the folks in the area say probably 1 out of every 2 plants in people's yards in Decatur is a Nandina. I lived in Decatur. That's probably pretty accurate. The other one, same thing. Nandina is just so widespread and ubiquitous as a garden plant in those areas. And when the cedar waxwings come through, cedar waxwings will eat until they cannot eat anymore. They just gorge themselves. And those deaths have occurred in April. Well, during winter into spring, the cedar waxwing subsist almost entirely on fruit, and in the summers they subsist on insects. And in April, there's very few things with fruit on them still. If you have a diverse garden like we have here at the Arboretum, birds do not touch the Nandina berries. They do not like them. They will sit on a Nandina and pick fruit off of a holly next to it, but they will leave the Nandina, which is why in April there are still berries on a Nandina that the cedar waxwings can eat. Now, people hear that and say, Nandina's fault. No, it is a problem with monocultures. It's a problem with lack of diversity. Diverse plantings will give fruit for birds. It'll give flowers with nectar for pollinators all year through. So we always blame the plant when it's real, because we don't like blaming ourselves, but it is a people problem, not a plant problem. And if you read through the literature carefully, you will see that, but it's always hidden. And I read peer-reviewed articles just today that said, Nandina berries are beloved by birds. Said it twice in a peer-reviewed article. I went to the citation. The citation is a website that some dude puts up who's an avid gardener since a child. That is not a citation that should be in a scientific paper. Sorry. I went on my tangent. Go ahead, Doug.
And I will add that one of my brothers has his PhD in ecology and works for the Rhode Island Audubon Society and was aware of that report and said it was bad science. So even an ecologist working for the Audubon Society doesn't think Nandinas are the problem.
Now, they are, to be clear, and I think Doug would agree, they are a legitimate escapee in some areas. Because birds sometimes do get desperate and eat them in the spring, and it generally doesn't kill them, and they fly and they, deposit the seeds in other places. So there are some areas in the Apalachicola National Forest with real issues with Nandina. So this is really about the killing birds versus otherwise. So.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Well, and if you're really worried about it, you can go, a lot of the new cultivars don't have fruit.
Yeah.
So go with a cultivar that doesn't fruit.
And actually, the one that our caller called in about blush pink is a fruitless one. Doesn't flower or fruit.
Awesome, great. Carol's follow-up question is regarding Lantana, ham and eggs. It's already growing some new growth on it. She's wondering when she should cut it back. Should she wait until the average last frost date?
What is she cutting back? The old
The
stems?
dead sticks from last year.
Oh, yeah, definitely go ahead and cut it back now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she might be thinking that sometimes you're supposed to wait for some of those plants with hollowish stems. I prune mine whenever I'm near them with a pruner.
Yeah.
If it happens to be December, that's when they get pruned. If it happens to be March, well, then lucky them.
In fact, it's exactly what happens here. It's just whenever you have time.
Okay, great. Well, we do have some online questions. Let me go back to the top of them and look for a really, really good one. Of course, they're all really great. Okay. Here's a question. There's actually several of them about gardenias. This person has a hard time growing the August gardenia. Normally they lose them immediately after transplanting them, either in a pot, which is just planting, or moving them from one location to another. Typical red clay soils, she mounds them up according to that, and they amend them with pine bark drainage. Any comments for planting gardenia for success and maybe even transplanting them? And it's probably only that one. She has success with other gardenias.
Well, that's odd. Other people can weigh in on that. Part of what, I always tell people, I think we all do, you don't amend a planting hole. You're better off going right into that red clay than you are digging a hole and adding amendments right in there, because that red clay and the looser soil just makes a bathtub and it holds water even though you've mounded it up. You've just raised the bathtub a little bit higher. So if you're going to plant, ideally you amend your entire beds with with organic matter and build your soil that way, and still plant a little high, and then make sure you do water after planting. Anybody else want to?
Well, I agree with you. It's really odd that she has the problem only with that one cultivar. I can't figure that out.
Cultivar in just one location, and other cultivars in other locations, right?
I don't know. She said it didn't matter if it was a pot or transplanted from one place to another, having trouble. So I don't know. But there's a lot of gardenias out there, so stop growing that one.
There certainly aren't there? Our next question's about fertilizer. Starts off generic, but we do have some specifics on there. Talk about fertilizers. Do you use them? How much? When? But especially related to azaleas, rhododendrons, hydrangeas, and dogwoods. So it sounds like all acid-loving plants, so according to that. Any recommendations?
I always say start with the soil test and add what the soil test tells you to add. If it's a long-established garden that's been fertilized or limed on a regular basis, you might not need phosphorus or potassium or additional lime. Get your soil test done. You're just shooting in the dark without a soil test.
And it's a good time to recommend a soil test because they become free in a matter of a couple of days. They're free starting in April here in North Carolina.
Good point.
And the boxes are available up at the soil testing location just to our north off of Blue Ridge Road. And I think every extension office should have them as well.
They should.
Yeah. And I think I saw some forms being filled out here just today. So yeah, I mean, that is something we do. I will say, I basically never fertilize my home garden with an inorganic fertilizer. One, I'm cheap and I don't like doing that. Two, we have clay soils, and those red clay soils are so rich in nutrients. Three, I add organic matter to my soils. I add a mulch that breaks down. I amend my beds before planting them. Then I use a mulch like decomposed leaves, which we use here, and that breaks down, and all that organic matter helps with that. And going back to say like something like the Nandina, the biggest correlation, I always say that you probably said it during these midweek things, the biggest correlation between invasives and natural habitats, the biggest factor that correlates is soil fertility. So if soil fertility is high in these natural areas, unnaturally high, you get more invasive plants because the ecosystem's already been disrupted. And that high fertility is coming from gardens and yards that are being over-fertilized, especially with nitrogen. It's more turf than garden beds. And so you really want to think twice about adding nitrogen, especially. Doug talked about phosphorus and potassium, which you may have more issues with. But if you're putting organic matter down, runoff from suburban areas is a major problem. And if you don't like invasive plants, don't over-fertilize. Don't worry about this plant, that plant. Don't over-fertilize. Get the ChemLawn, whatever they call themselves now, stop using them spraying and fertilizing your lawn so it looks like
Scary.
fake AstroTurf. Man, I'm getting on all my soapboxes today.
Good.
This is great.
Good.
Hopefully some more.
Stand up.
Yeah.
Let's check him in the program, the Mark Soapbox.
And I agree thoroughly with Mark. I just want to add that if you don't want to do a soil test, stand back and look at your garden. If the plants look healthy, they're making adequate growth, they don't need additional fertilizer. I know we were told over and over again that you fertilize things on a regular basis. You don't need to, not if they're doing well. And if they're not doing well, I think that's even more a reason to get a soil test, because you might add something they don't need and just make a bad problem worse. I've worked in long established gardens where things were fertilized and limed on a regular basis and phosphorus and potassium build up because our wonderful clay soils hold on to them. And those soils now had an excess of phosphorus and potassium and too much lime. And so the growing conditions were no longer ideal. So don't fertilize if your garden looks healthy. Get the soil test if you're determined to fertilize, and definitely get a soil test if your plants are not doing well.
Excellent. So next question is, what causes camellia leaves to turn red or burgundy? It's happening to both the person's Sasanqua and Japonica types. And that's from Paul out in Wilmington.
Is it just the older leaves?
Didn't specify,
Because,
but I'm guessing sun exposure in some cases.
well, Sasanquas shouldn't turn
Should-
red.
I never have.
Yeah, and Japonicas in hot sun will turn sort of yellowy green. Evergreens are evergreen, but that doesn't mean they don't lose foliage. I'm looking over my shoulder at these camellias, and I can see they're shedding some of their oldest leaves. A lot of evergreens lose a lot of their oldest leaves at the time of year that they're putting out new foliage, and often that foliage colors up just like deciduous plants color up before they fall. I don't know, maybe somebody else has
Looks like
a better
Mark has
answer
something to
than
add.
that.
Well, I was just going to say, since you said Paul's out in Wilmington, which is a little bit warmer, that's coastal. If it's it could be new growth coming out, and many camellias, the new growth does come out a really nice dark color. If it's not that, if it's just starting to turn burgundy now on old growth, one soil test might be in order. It also could be that I've seen kind of the leaves turn a little burgundy if they're at just the right stage when some cold weather comes through. Not enough to really damage them, but enough to kind of get those anthocyanins going or something. So,
Okay, great. We have a rare yes or no question. Are knockout roses grown on grafts?
No.
I got 3 no's out of that. Oh, there's a 4th no. That Dennis is our holdout for today. Alrighty, this one's from Kath. Her evergreen clematis leaves have turned black. Is that from the cold? I know mine was not happy a couple weeks ago, but mine's right up against the house, so it wasn't totally damaged.
Is it the new growth or is it the old?
It hasn't
yeah.
specified, but I'm going to assume the new growth.
Yeah,
They
cold
were
damage.
growing.
anybody else have a thought? Because I have a thought.
Okay, yeah.
So, well, if new growth, cold. If it's old growth, probably it is sooty mold.
Oh,
Yeah.
Clematis armandii. I had to remove it from a structure going over my garage because it was coming up my house, and my wife was real unhappy with how black the side of our garage was turning because of scale and them dropping their scale poo, their frass, and sooty mold growing on there. So if she goes out and she can rub it off her leaves, that's what it is. And so her plants have scale or aphids they get.
I've had aphids.
Aphids, yeah,
definitely
aphids.
do it, but I
Or
think scalp
even
can
white
do it
fly.
too.
Well, if you have
Oh,
white
sure.
fly,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Clematis armandii is just the aphids. Every time I've grown it, I get bad cases of sooty mold on it.
I've had scale on a holly that made sooty mold on the lower portions of the holly and the plants below it.
I've got it on some of my overstory tulip poplars, and so which come down all over my plants, and so they all kinds of plants in my garden have sooty mold because of an overstory tree.
I actually lost all of my fish in my garden ponds in Texas. Our hickory had bad case of aphids one spring. And the hickories, I'm guessing, just had more oil in them. And it covered all the ponds in a invisible oil slick. And the fish all suffocated. It was quite remarkable. And the only pond that wasn't near the hickory was the one that was fine. But we had to overflow the ponds to get rid of the film off the top. So they could be in it. It took us quite a while to figure that one out. All righty, we got a hydrangea question. That's kind of how we started over here in person. Can hydrangea arborescens, Haas hollow or halo, take wet feet occasionally?
I'd be reluctant. It likes moist but well-drained soil, and probably a little bit more drought tolerant than some other selections of arborescens. But if you're talking about wet feet where the soil's saturated with water, I'd avoid that.
Yeah, that's if you see them growing in the wild. If you hike and see them growing, they grow on like slopes and really like rock faces where there's some big gaps and some soil that accumulates, and where there's kind of that water dripping down on a very regular basis. But you never see them growing in a spot where it's wet.
All righty.
Soil being saturated can kill some plants really quickly. We had a hurricane probably in 2017 or 18 where, like we lost several zelkovas in the garden just from, what was it, like 8 hours of rain or something like that. It's just where what happens when water is saturated, all the air is forced out of the soil, and roots need oxygen just like we need oxygen, so roots suffocate, they drown.
Alrighty, and here's next question. Can you comment on the use of hydrogen peroxide and Epsom salts? And I'm going to assume this is gardening related. When can each be helpful? Some articles seem to say that they improve plants in many situations. I've never heard of hydrogen peroxide being used for
Me
plants.
either.
I've heard hydrogen peroxide.
I've heard Epsom salts, but I've
Yes.
never used them myself.
Epsom salts is, I'm going to probably get this wrong, it's either a source of magnesium or manganese, and I think it's magnesium. And so some plants benefit from that. I know I've never used it. Hellebore people often use Epsom salts on hellebores, but if you use dolomitic lime, I think you get magnesium from that. I've used the hydrogen peroxide for cleaning your pruning tools. That might be the only use for it in the garden.
Okay, thank you.
I need to shut up, right?
I will give one other use that I've seen for Epsom salts, and that's sometimes rose people use it. They put it down this time of year, a little bit earlier, winter coming into early spring. And what I was always told, I don't know if this is true or not, so I am passing on hearsay from a rosarian I knew. The reason they did that was the magnesium and whatever form it is in the Epsom salts helped break new canes out. So you would get new canes if you didn't have sometimes roses get a little spindly and those thin canes, and you want those nice fat ones for your, hybrid teas and floribundas and things, that the Epsom salts would help that. I don't know if it's true or not.
Give it a try, right? Okay, a question from Stacy. Stacy has a Magnolia Jane, and it has a single leader, but she has a large side shoot as well coming out of the trunk. It looks like coming from the base. Wants to know if she should cut it, or does she need to wait for it to become something more established? Will it bud out additional desirable branches? Kind of sounds like it might even be coming out of the rootstock too.
Yes.
It
Is that, I can't remember if that's a graft.
Yeah.
could be.
If it's a graft, it's probably the graft, the understock coming up.
I've never seen one of those with a single stem. Is she keeping it to a single stem? Usually they have, 50 stems or something.
She hasn't said that she's keeping at a single stem, because that one does kind of make a lot of shoots.
Yeah, it's more of a large shrub.
Yeah.
Is it a graft?
It could be either grafted or not grafted. With Jane,
I tend to think that's not one that's grafted.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a multi-stem usually.
Well, it is many, many stems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, Yeah, I've never seen Jane that looked like that. I don't know how old this one is. Jane might be really interesting as a single-stemmed plant. But, without seeing the tree, it's hard to say, is the side branch really shooting way off to the side and making the plant unsightly? If that's the case, you might want to cut it. You might want to take it back. If it's, really big, that can really stress a tree out, and you can lose a tree if you're cutting off a huge limb. And if it's coming from the rootstock, if it is grafted and it's coming from the rootstock, you definitely want to get that. The only other thing I'll say is, when it flowers, double check it and make sure that what you've got really is Jane, because that just is not how they typically grow unless you have a very, very young plant. And if you do, it will keep putting out more stems from the base and become multi-stemmed unless you really work at it.
I've certainly encountered people who think that their plant, and I'm not speaking solely about magnolias now, but I ran into this with a rose and with a viburnum, where someone assumed they had to cut off all new shoots coming from the crown. And in both of those cases, they ended up with just old wood and no new stems. So I would bet that Jane is not grafted, and they just need to let a bunch new shoots to grow from ground level.
So whenever we have questions like this, that the panelists need a little bit more information, we do encourage you to come out and unmute your microphone and talk to them interactively, because you might be putting something in the chat, and with so many comments in the chat, I'm going to be missing them. So feel free to unmute yourself and just give them a little bit more information. But we'll move on to the next one. Looks like another possible yes or no one, but more information I'm sure is welcome. Lori is wondering, are there annual and perennial kinds of lantanas?
Well, lantana, with the common lantanas, it's more are they winter hardy or not, and that's going to vary where you garden. If you're gardening in Maine, they're all not hardy, so they are treated as annuals because they only last that one growing season. In this climate, some of the common lantanas are fully winter hardy, and even in this warm climate, some of them are not. Now, we do grow another species of lantana, Lantana trifolia, which comes back from seed every year, so I would consider that a true annual, but at the same time, maybe in a frost-free climate, it's a perennial. So in part, the answer to our question is yes, but it also depends on where you're gardening.
So sticking with the lantana, Betty is wondering, how far back do you cut the lantanas? Going back to our earlier question.
Cut it back to where the base, basically, where the new growth is coming up, because unless we're in a really mild winter, or like Doug says, if it's further south where they're fully hardy, top hardy, it's gonna die to the ground here in this area, unless it's super mild.
Okay. And Maureen says she has some fig cuttings that she's started. Looks like brown figs. And when and if growth appears, apparently she's questioning if they're still alive. What kind of fertilizer recommend for figs?
Well, we can go back to get your soil tested question.
Yep. Going to apply for a lot of the fertilizer questions.
Yeah.
Well, was she looking to container grow them or put them in the ground?
Has not specified. Maureen, if you want to come in, you can say if you're container grown or going to be putting them in the ground when they're ready to go.
Yeah, growing things in containers is very different from growing them planted in the ground. In containers here at the Arboretum, what do we use usually?
We usually use like a slow release Osmocote.
Yeah, timed release.
Timed release?
Yeah.
So it gives nutrients over a period of time.
Okay. Moving on to the next one, John is wondering if daffodils reproduce from seed. He's noticed what looks like baby daffodils 1 foot to 2 feet away from his existing plantings. And if not, how do they even get there?
You want to take that?
Technically, yes, they do reproduce by seed, but it doesn't happen terribly often in our gardens. But, it could be, if you're lucky enough.
Yeah, and most of the daffodils we grow are interspecific hybrids between more than one wild narcissus, and they don't make much seed, but some of them probably make some seed. But if you're growing species daffodils like the wild jonquils or the little hoop petticoat, those are quite fertile and they do make a lot of seed, and will sometimes naturalize in a garden.
Yeah, and sometimes, like if you're gardening around where those are, sometimes you'll split off a piece of bulb and get some of the base, and instead of rotting, it'll heal up, and you'll get new plants coming up, and they'll be small like seedlings because they don't have much of the energy reserve. So, if it's one of the modern hybrids, probably more likely that that's happened than you've gotten seed, but as they said in the original Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Alrighty, the next one's from Stacy. Stacy has a stellar ruby magnolia. She planted it in the fall in a whole entire bed that was amended. And she says her plant's looking a little more yellow than it should. And she's just wondering what could be possibly going on with that one. Is there even possibly an iron deficit? And by the way, she lives in zone 8A south of us.
I would guess it's probably the old growth right now, and it hasn't flushed in the new growth. And it like we were talking about the camellias earlier. You get fall foliage kind of more or less on a lot of your evergreens in the spring, just before they reflush.
Just like the camellias behind you with some yellow leaves on them. Those are all older leaves, are all falling off.
Yeah, if she's planting in an area that's not sand and it's been amended, then she should probably check the soil to make sure it isn't holding too much water, which it shouldn't be. But otherwise, a plant that was planted in the fall should not be showing iron deficiencies already. It hasn't done much growing between the fall and now, and just wouldn't be iron deficient. Now, if there was absolutely no iron once it started growing, you might see some of that, but no, at this point it's barely doing anything with the soil that's there.
Okay, moving on for Chris's comments and questions. So Chris has planted arugula around her vegetable gardens in a community garden for years under the premise, and it's twofold premise, I like this one, that rabbits hate arugula and will stay out of the garden, or on the flip side, that they like it so much that they'll eat it and leave her other plants alone. And she says, guess what? It seems to work for some beds, but not for others. Is there some kind of miracle plant that will repel rabbits? She's planting lots of cilantro and wants to save the crop.
Does anybody have anything?
No.
Cat or a dog?
No.
Yeah, cat or a dog. There is something that I won't guarantee is universal. This is anecdotal evidence based on my parents' vegetable garden when I was growing up. Somebody told my mother that rabbits will not go into an area that they cannot see. If you have a wire fence, even a low fence or something that's too high for a rabbit to jump over, but they can see through it, they'll dig under it. They'll go for it. So my father put a barrier, it was maybe 18 inches tall, maybe 24 inches tall, of solid wood around the vegetable garden where you couldn't see through. It was all the way down to the ground, and there were no problems with rabbits for years. At some point, it started breaking down a little bit, or the soil eroded at the bottom, and once there was a gap and they could see that there were plants, they were in there again. At that point, there were farmers markets, and my mom gave up gardening, I think.
Too funny.
And started eating rabbits.
We're all from the South. Rabbits are good food.
Oh, sure.
The Southerners and the French.
The next one is from Pam. Pam's looking for recommendations for what to plant in front of her knockout roses that are in front of her holly shrub foundation in front of her townhome. She says that someone has said radiance abelia might be a good choice. Anything that you would love to see in someone's landscape?
And actually, the knockout roses got that witch's broom, and so we're replacing them.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, rose rosette.
Yeah.
Where's your, yes.
Well, I assume it's a sunny area if you were growing roses. The options are endless. Come to our plant sale and shop. You know, there's just so many things that could be recommended.
Yeah, I mean, the Abelia would be nice if
Colorful
nothing
year
else.
round, yeah.
And Radiance is a creamy white variegation. There are we got one in today that was bright yellow, new growth on it. I mean, not a speck of green on it. I
No.
mean, there's so much. There's a lot of different things, you know.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, come walk through the garden, see what you see.
Okay. If there's anything especially hard to kill,
Well, abelias are pretty
Abelias.
hard to kill. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
If you want a really hard to kill plant, I'm on year 3 of covering 2 crepe myrtles with a sun impenetrable cover, and they are still alive. They have not seen daylight for 3 years now. And there's dwarf ones, and they flower nicely. Mark is smiling. Any comment on that?
No, the crepe myrtles. I have removed a crepe myrtle, and I have root suckers coming up
Yep.
everywhere. Even though I built beds up, 3 feet over them.
That's one tough plant, isn't it?
Yes.
All right. So Marilyn has asked, I guess that's more of a comment, so I'll skip that one because that's just a comment for people to read about the soil tests.
That must have been something really nasty about us. Kristen
Yeah.
wants to
she
spare our
just said,
feelings.
do get a soil test if you have a plant that's not doing well. So it was comments following up on yours. And I skipped one on accident. Someone says, is there a lime needed for fescue turf? That goes back to all your fertilizer things, get a soil test. They do a great job of checking for the pH and analysis, and we'll tell you how much to use for that.
and
Mark?
and they tell you to use too much fertilizer
Yep.
for your turf. Don't if you feel like you have to follow their recommendations on that, use the lowest rate they give you, and preferably use that low rate and split it up into multiple applications, because they always tell you to put a lot of nitrogen on there, and nitrogen will move right through our soils and right into the storm drains and right into wetlands and all that kind of thing.
All righty, and we've got another one from Chris. She's been given a terrific island in an incredibly poor soil in a community garden. She wants to plant an herb garden there for growing some herbs to donate for Feed the Pack. And she's read that herbs actually like poor soil. Any advice on getting started?
They like many of them their oils accumulate better in very lean soils, not in very fertile soils, and fertile soils for a lot of herbs. This is not all of them. This is mostly the Mediterranean type herbs, the rosemaries and culinary sages, but they like poor, well-drained soils, not poor, heavy soils.
Thank you, Mark. And Judy says that she is in Zone 7 up in Virginia, and every year squash bugs ruin any summer squash that she grows. And she's specifically referring to those annoying, she calls them flocks of bugs. Sounds like she has a really bad problem, that gather on the underside of the leaves, but she also has some that bore. Just wondering if cedar mulch will help repel them. I haven't heard of that, but I've heard of cedar in closets and stuff, but never as a mulch. Any comments for helping with those? I know it's a really tough problem to work around in the vegetable garden.
Commercial vegetable growers sometimes cover things with fleece. You can find it from like a Johnny's seed catalog that supports the commercial growers. It's like the remade that you would cover for cold protection, but much lighter, and they'll use it on things like eggplants that tend to always be bothered by flea beetles. Just completely enclose the plant with that.
Yeah, but that's a good one. I've heard of that one being used.
Try not growing squash for a few years, and maybe
That's a good point.
reduce the concentration of them.
That's what I was going to say. Rotate crops. I know squash
I hate to say it, but based upon her comment, it sounds like she hasn't been growing squash for many years now. Trying to, but not very successfully. Sorry, Judy, about that. That is a tough one. You're growing some of those
Get
summer
your
squashes.
zucchinis from your neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. You find somebody who doesn't have a problem. You grow even more tomatoes. Bring them tomatoes. Let them give you squash.
All righty. And I've also heard planting the squashes at different times too. Don't plant them all at one time. Stagger them a little bit. All right. One from Suzanne. She's asking for recommendations for a low ground cover for a gravel parking lot, specifically in Wilmington.
Bermuda grass.
I was thinking grasses would work out well.
Well, for a parking lot, meaning that vehicles are going to drive over it?
I read it the same way as you did. Suzanne, you can come in and ask or specify if it's going to be a drivable parking lot where you can drive on whatever the ground cover. Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
Drivable. It's right now, it's got kind of big chunky gravel, and there's some really nice, very dark green, very low growing, little yellow flowered, I'm guessing an oxalis that's going great guns. And I said this is at the Bellamy Mansion in Wilmington where I garden. So I'm thinking, instead of trying to kill all the weeds, why don't we just let the really low ones go for it? And what do you think?
I think, sure, you can do that. The problem is there's basically no plant that will tolerate constant cars driving on it. If it's now and then, there are plenty of things you can get away with doing that for. But if it's a parking lot that is used, what'll probably happen is in the corners where it grows, where people don't drive, it'll look weedy, and everywhere else there won't be much of any weeds in there. Now,
So do you think we should still fire blast it every so often? That's what had been happening, and then the guy retired.
well, what you might do is, in some of those areas where cars aren't going to drive, put some ornamental plants, spreading plants, like what your original question was. And we have a great flowering lawn. You should come up here and see it. But, low things like dianthus, like Delosperma, thymes, there's a lot of plants like that that'll really thrive in an area like that. And then let the weeds go and put out an interpretive sign that says you are letting the edges of your space support pollinators and insects and things like that. And they're only weeds if you don't want them.
Right.
So if you have some things that look a little more intentional, then you can kind of get away with the weeds in there a little bit easier without people thinking you're slacking off on the job.
And you can just periodically come in, cut off anything that's too tall periodically.
Yeah. Just come in and, zip it down if you start getting some tall weeds.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have another one from Jennifer. She's looking for some suggestions. Specifically, she has a slope in her backyard that causes a mudslide issue in one of the corners of the yard. She's just wondering if there's some kind of plant, ground cover, for instance, that you could suggest that might mitigate the excess water. Kind of sounds like she might need something to help mitigate the mud issues, to hold the mud up on the slope.
Is it sun or shade?
Yeah, sun or shade.
So Jennifer, you can come in and tell us. She did not specify sun or shade.
It's mostly shade.
Oh man, we got the plant for you at our plant sale.
Oh dear.
Okay.
It's our native, what do they call it?
Coral
Green and
bird?
gold.
Oh, green and gold.
Chrysogonum virginianum. Little ground covering plant with yellow flowers. But the cultivar we're going to have in our plant sale is one called Eco Lacquered Spider, and it is the most vigorous thing. It's crazy how vigorous this thing is. And that's what you want. You want something that's going to spread and root in to hold that bank up and slow the water down. If you're in Raleigh, there's a great program in Raleigh. I forget what it's called, but if you go to the stormwater folks, they will actually pay for 75 or
It was something like that is
90%
what
of
Ann was saying last
of
week.
your of the cost of doing some mitigation there. Rain catchment, rain gardens, anything like that keeps the water from running off like that. They will pay for almost the whole thing. Now, if you're not in Raleigh, then tough luck.
I mean, Durham.
You got to
No.
be in Raleigh, but you can still,
Okay.
it may be a multi-pronged approach. If you're getting really bad runoff, lots of mud, you need to slow the water down, or else it's just going to wash the plants down as well.
There is a chance a different city has a similar program.
Yeah,
But the
Yes.
one Mark talking about is only applicable to Raleigh.
Yeah, years ago, I know in Durham they were paying people to do rain gardens. I don't know if that program is still ongoing. And if the ground cover could be a bit taller, a native shrub that covers a lot of territory and tolerates shade goes by several common names of Indian currant or coralberry. The genus is Symphora carpus. Name about that long, but showy purple fruit all winter.
Okay, great, thank you.
Do you know if there was a municipal program in Durham?
It was through either the city or the county.
Okay.
No, I'd go on the city website probably.
So the next one's from Patricia, who sounds like she's not having a lot of fun gardening this year. She's looking for recommendations for animal repellents. She's had to replant everything the past few weeks because they keep on digging everything up. Either it's deer, raccoons, possums, or squirrels. She's not too sure which. They don't chew up the plants. They just dig them up enough to expose the roots. And she's tried bonide so far and cayenne pepper. Any other recommendations?
Oh, the hot pepper was going to be my recommendation, so I don't have
So
anything
Doug's
else.
out.
Do those ones that discourage them from eating it, would that affect that? I don't know, like I Must Garden or something like that? Or,
I
Well-
like Irma's garden, but I don't. If she could narrow down, they have some specific option. They have some
Different critters.
specific ones. If she can narrow down what's
Well, it's
doing
not
it.
sounding like anything's really eating it. So I don't know what's that going on. I had pansies pulled out of the ground, but that's because deer tried to eat them and they would
Yeah.
just pull them out of the ground while they were eating
Yeah.
them. Then
Yeah.
they just leave them there.
I don't know if she's got squirrels.
Yes.
I know squirrels will dig things up.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
not necessarily eat them.
yeah, it was in a friend's garden, but the squirrels were digging everywhere, uprooting her little treasures. She just sprinkled chili, hot pepper flakes on it, and it solved the problem.
Generally, the key is nothing lasts for a long time in terms of effectiveness. So, well, one, you got to reapply it, whatever you put on there. But two, they get inured to it over time and you have to change it up. But, a lot of people have success with things like liquid fence.
What I use.
My problems, it's been so bad this year for me that for the first time ever, I am doing some protection of plants. And I went and got a big roll of some light hardware cloth and I just cut it into squares. I don't make it into circles to put around my plants because while they'll still do damage once things are really growing, generally it's not as bad as right now when there isn't as much food. So I just take it and leave it in the kind of that curved piece that I've cut off the roll, and I just kind of throw that over my young plants, and I'll move it. I'll take it off and put it under my porch. Once things have really flushed out and are looking good. That it isn't to say that deer won't bother things in my garden over the summer, but my problems aren't nearly as bad as they are right now.
Yeah, and if you can keep them from digging them up until they're established,
Yeah.
that mechanical means might be a way to do it.
Okay.
I planted a couple of flats of begonias one year, and the next day I went out and they were all scattered all over the place.
That's squirrels.
So a raccoon had been getting his exercise.
That-
But we replanted them all and broadcast Milorganite over them, and they were fine.
That's usually squirrels that do that. Pull all those plants out. They see you digging a bunch of holes And literally, they think, they dig holes too. They dig holes to put acorns in and seed down, and they think you're doing that. And if you've ever done a big planting with bulbs and pansies, you'll go out and all the pansies will be gone. And sometimes you'll look up in a tree and there'll be a tulip bulb, stuck in the crotch of the branch of the tree. They assume that you're doing what they would do, and will go out there, and they get real frustrated because they can't find anything good that you've planted, and so they just keep digging up everywhere you did and
Same thing for container
throwing the
gardens.
plants all over.
Yeah.
A nice newly planted container garden always attracts squirrels in my yard.
Yep.
Little boogers. All right, next one's from Isha. She has a white flowering crepe myrtle, although I don't think the flower has anything to do with it. It's beginning to show buds. Of course, it's spring, but her limbs have a dusty blemish on them. I have never heard of a dusty blemish on a crepe myrtle limb. Anyone think of anything?
Just the aging bark. Ooh.
That
I almost thought that maybe it was dying until I saw the buds coming out, but it just looks like a little, some little blemishes in different places on different limbs.
Is it on the new growth?
No, it was there before the new growth.
Okay.
I almost thought that it was dead because it looked dry, but now it's budding. So on the internet, I saw something about brushing the limbs with soapy water, or I don't know.
I think we're all having a little bit of trouble just picturing what you're talking about. Does it look like the bark is kind of drying off and pulling away from the limbs?
No, because it's a new shrub. It's not even a tree yet.
I mean, it could be sooty mold. Is it like, does it come off when you rub it?
I haven't touched it.
Oh.
It just looks almost like gray. It's not like dusty mold or anything. It's just this color.
Take a picture of it and go on our website and send the picture to me or Doug or Tim or Dennis, any of us, and we'll look at it and see if we can figure out what it is. But I think we need to see it.
Yeah, visuals would be very helpful. I wonder
I will do that.
how big how big of diameter are the stems that this stuff is on?
It's on a bunch of them, and it's maybe less than an eighth of an inch wide. I mean, it's not maybe a fourth of an inch wide. I mean, it's not, and it's not bugs. It's like in the grain of the limb, but it's kind of like a grayish discoloration.
I think I know what you're talking about now, and that's just the plant. That's just natural.
That's what I was wondering.
Send a picture and we'll look at it. But I think what you're seeing is just what the plant looks like this time of year.
All righty. Next one's from Kath. This is going back to the sooty mold. She's wondering if that can be treated.
Wash it off.
I'd say better prevent it.
Prevent it, yeah, but...
Well, maybe we need to say a little bit more about how sooty mold comes about. It's often on the plants that are overhead. It's the feeding of aphids or similar insects. They're on this 24 hours, 7 days a week diet of sugary plant juice. They have so much sugar in their diet that they exude sugar, otherwise known as honeydew. That ends up on the plants underneath where they're feeding, and that sugary coating is what grows the sooty mold. So long term, the thing to do is to treat the plant that on which the insects are feeding, and if they're no longer there, then there won't be the raining of honeydew on the plants below it, and the sooty mold won't grow on it. The sooty mold on the plants, I guess, could just be washed off with, let it, like your dirty pots and pans, you let soak for a while before you start trying to remove it, but just wet them down and then hose them off gently.
And I'd recommend, if we're talking about the clematis, rather than even try and clean it off, because that'll be a pain, I would cut it all the way, if you can, cut the whole clematis down after it finishes flowering, because you've got aphids. Unless you have a tree above it with aphids, the aphids are probably growing up high on the more tender, younger growth from previous years. So if you cut it all down and get rid of it, you'll get rid of a lot of the aphids. Now they'll come back, but with the newly growing plant, it's a little bit easier to control the aphids, because that's your issue, is the insect. It's not the sooty mold. Sooty mold can harm plants because it can cover all the photosynthetic surface, but it's a secondary issue. It's the insects that are the main issue.
Yeah, and I can improve what I said. The first step is to identify where these insects are living. Is it on the plant with the sooty mold, or is it on something up above the plant? And then you'll know which plant needs to be treated for the insect infestation.
Agreed. Although if it's the Clematis armandii we're talking about again, it's on that, I guarantee it.
Okay.
I'm gonna go home and check mine out.
This is me. It's growing next to a house without any trees right there on a trellis. It was blooming beautifully, and then we hit 29 degrees. And it just seems like I've had sooty mold before. Now I can go back and touch it. It's in a different house. But it just seems like the leaves are dying. I mean, like they got bruised and turned black. But I'll go see if I can rub it off.
So
Bruised and toned.
you said they were nice until the cold weather.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Probably the
thinking.
chill
It was
damage.
so hard.
Yeah.
It was blooming. It was
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's
It's been good for 3 years.
It sounds like chill damage to the new growth.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll take a picture and send it if I can't rub it off.
Well, if you
Thank
can't
you.
rub it off, it's cold damage.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Right.
it'll flush back out.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question, or actually not next question. Paul from out in the coast said that Epsom salts are good for palms.
Okay.
I never used that on my palms that I have, but Paulson knows better. He's out at the coast. Okay, this one's a direct message to me. When is the best time to take cuttings of Edgeworthia, and are they best rooted in a pot or in the ground?
Winter or summer.
Yeah.
People do leafless hardwood cuttings in the winter, usually pulling the little suckers that are growing from the crown, and we certainly do very well with summer cuttings with foliage.
And in pots.
Yeah.
With sterile soil.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Jeannie has...
Sterile media.
Yeah.
Not soils.
Jeannie has been looking for a cultivar of lima beans called Nemagreen. It's recommended on the North Carolina State vegetable cultivar list as being nematode resistant, but just has not been having any luck finding them. Has any of you planted Nemagreen or looked for it or had a good vegetable seed list that you can try? We're overall not veggie gardeners over here.
Online.
My guess is she's been looking for those. So sorry, Jeannie, about that one. All right, so we have up next. Okay. Okay, this one's from Stacy. On the same note as the Lantana question, so going back a while, when a site such as Proven Winter says the plant is an annual, but the zone shows that it's hard in your area, does that mean it's a perennial for you?
It's likely, yeah. Yeah, you know.
Proven Winters is trying to sell across the entire United States, and I'm guessing even in Canada.
Oh, sure. Yeah. A lot of the things that are sold as annuals are only annuals because they don't survive the winter. And in Zone 7, quite a few half-hardy things survive the winter, so they prove to be winter-hardy herbaceous perennials.
The number of the salvias we've found that with.
And, you know, try it and maybe you'll discover it's hardier than you imagined.
Okay. This one's from Maryland. She keeps on reading that legumes add nitrogen to the soil so they're good to grow. For example, as a cover crop, but they don't have to be tilled into the soil to lead to nitrogen there. That was a question. So I guess she's wondering if they do need to be tilled, which would bring up a lot of weed seed in her vegetable garden. She just wants to understand if legumes are beneficial to the soil for anything other than themselves if they aren't tilled into the soil. the nitrogen fixing part's down in the ground. So
Yes.
some of it is down below.
Oh no, it's yeah, very definitely it's beneficial to the soil. I mean, it's a long-term process, but yeah, they legumes, plants in the bean family, which include a lot of things like clover and other plants. They fix atmospheric nitrogen and bring it into the plant. So yeah, you can grow it and then just cut them back and leave the tops there on the soil. But even if you were to cut it back and remove all the tops, you'd be losing some good stuff, but you would still be building nitrogen into the soil.
And keep the tops for compost.
Yeah.
And that way you have the benefit of both. Alrighty, this one's another direct message. Any suggestions how to improve germination rates for very small seeds like dragon wing begonias? Boy, I've never grown a begonia from a seed myself.
They need light. That's the key, probably one of the key things. If you get them below the soil surface, they're probably not going to germinate.
So you're suggesting that to just sow them on the surface?
Surface sow them.
I agree.
Yes.
Yes.
They probably come in a pelletized seed too, is my guess. So they're relatively easy to sow that way.
Yeah,
but don't bury
seed.
that thing.
Pelletized seed makes it easier to handle.
Yeah,
Begonia seeds are super
they're
small.
tiny.
Well,
And-
I'm sorry.
If whoever they purchasing seed of a dragon wing begonia, or are they collecting some seed that they
Didn't
got?
specify, and I don't remember who it was. I've already moved off. It was a direct message.
I collected them.
Yeah, so I don't know the background, the parentage of dragon wing begonia, but there's a good chance that it is
Hybrid.
that you're not getting that dragon wing begonias will not give you good seed. The vigor they show, leads me to think that it's quite possible that that they don't have good seed. I don't want to go down that road completely. So, we get plants in we grow begonias from species begonias that we collect in the wild in Asia. And, we get some of the the annual type begonias for our color trials. But that we get, or most that we get from our color trials, are rooted cuttings that we get. There are some that we grow from seed, some of the wax begonia types that are sold as annuals. But these really highly hybridized ones are the seed's going to be probably not terribly easy to do for a lot of them.
So on a similar note, I grow my canary wings begonia, which is kind of similar, in a hanging basket. And I just prune it back a little bit and put it in the garage for the winter time. It doesn't need water too frequently. And then come late winter, sometime in March, take some cuttings, start some new ones. And I still have the original plant, which I just pop in the ground somewhere. So I just kind of make a continuous cycle with that one. Because I can't imagine doing begonias from seed.
They actually, if you have good seed, they're pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
As Tim said, you get a nice fine seed starting media.
Yep.
And you just sprinkle the seeds on top so that they have light, but they don't have any reserves in there. So if they start germinating and they dry out, that they're done. Maybe some of the seeds that haven't started germinating can still start, but they don't have much there. So if you don't take care of them constantly, it only takes one time of drying out for them to be all gone.
I think part of my problem was I just know that plant's going to take forever to grow from a little tiny seed, even tiny little plant, and I know how easy they are to do from cuttings. And you get a lot better instant gratification. So I think we're probably better off just doing one more question because it's getting a little bit late over here. This one is from Nancy. She has a container garden question. She has a trough container about 2 feet deep, 11 inches wide and 42 inches long. She has used Daddy Pete's soil in it and she's not having much good success. She's wondering if the soil is too dense. She's also looking for suggestions for evergreens that will grow in this situation, will grow to about 5 feet high. So suggestion for some soil or potting soil.
My
for
first
that one?
question would be, does it have drainage?
There you go, Nancy. Can you come online and tell us?
It does have drainage. It does, but it's deep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What? Yeah.
Should I abandon it? The question is, should I abandon this container? I guess if you.
What is it made out of?
It's a synthetic kind of resin type thing.
I was going to say, if it was a nice stone trough, then I was going to say, yes, you should abandon it. And I will help take it off your hands and get rid of it.
The Daddy Pete.
What Daddy Pete's was it? The Daddy Pete sells quite a few varieties.
Oh, container soil, container potting mix.
What and what have you tried? Growing?
Plant-wise?
I've tried a oh, come on, my older brain is not functioning. Well, I had good luck with lavender one year.
Oh my!
Until I didn't. I have strong western exposure from about 1 o'clock on in the summer. It's an odd kind of situation because in the winter it doesn't get enough light or doesn't get that much. I've tried osmanthus, the variegated osmanthus.
How old is the media?
Yeah, important question.
It was new. It was new.
New.
It wasn't old. It wasn't pre-used. Or
yeah, but if you've grown lavender and then osmanthus, how long has the media been in the container?
Oh, gosh, you're asking me a question I can't answer. I would say 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
You probably don't have any nutrients left in the media.
Well, and it's probably broken down.
Yeah.
It's broken down.
It's going to get compacted.
Dense, and don't think it's too dense or too rich or, that's the thing. Mark said drainage. That's been my biggest concern. It has holes, in the container, but I don't think it has the kind of drainage it needs.
Well, and there's a couple things. If you have a big container that's sitting on the ground, often those drain holes get clogged. Roots go through there, or they just get packed with muck and they don't drain very well. But, earlier Doug was talking about, the water in the soil and, pushing all the oxygen out. When you have a product like Daddy Pete's and it's in a container for 3 or 4 years, it breaks down and the pieces get finer and finer and finer. And even if it isn't too wet, you will often not have much in the way of air in there because the particles have gotten so fine. What I would suggest is empty it out. Get you can get a potting mix, get a fairly coarse potting mix, but then get some permatil and mix that in with your soil. And you can get like pine bark chips, like what a nursery would use, and mix the permatil in there. And what you're doing in effect is really kind of creating like a rooftop mix, and that helps keep the soil from compacting as much because of the permatil in there, and it keeps aeration in there. It keeps the air pockets in there because it doesn't break down, and it'll last much, much longer. And then because it's in a container, that's an area where you do need to fertilize on occasion. So, come in spring when things are getting going and put in a slow release like Nutricoat or Osmocoat, something like that. Maybe a 6-month slow release fertilizer. Thank you. And if
that's perfect.
Yeah, and if you do that,
very helpful.
Most plants that are hardy here should work just fine in there.
I think you're all right. I think that was very helpful. If you have a suggestion of a plant, I'd love it. Taking up enough time.
Come to our plant sale.
There you go. Come to the plant sale. We could load you up with stuff.
We can set you up.
All righty. Well, it's just about 4:15, so that means it's time to go. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great time answering your questions. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for taking part of their day out here and spending it here with us for our wonderful midweek program. We look forward to seeing you next week at Wednesday at 3 o'clock. See you then. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.